Have you ever felt ashamed that there is addiction, alcoholism, substance use disorders, whatever you want to call it, in your family? Like if you grew up this way with a parent who drank too much or had some other kind of addiction, have you ever felt so ashamed that you don't want to think about it or talk about it? I've been there, and recently I've heard from a few different people who talk about how much shame they still hold on to, even decades later after they moved out of their parents' house. They still feel ashamed that their parent drank too much. And part of that shame is tied to not realizing just how common this is. My name is Jody Lamb. I grew up with an alcoholic mother. Over the last almost 20 years now, I've been on this healing journey and learning how to take good care of myself, and I've been sharing what I've learned along the way. And yesterday, I was working on a part of my memoir that comes out in September about those experiences, and it was focused on statistics. And I've been following the stats about how common substance use disorders are, or addiction, how common it is for kids to have a parent who is drinking too much, struggles with addiction. And over these 20 years, those stats really haven't changed too much. And so I have the latest, and I'd like to share that with you today so you can see, just how common it is. And I will have all of the information on the sources for these stats linked in the description. So first, I want to clarify, what is a substance use disorder? Because that is a newer term that is used more commonly today than addiction or alcoholism. And so I just want to help define that so you understand it. This is in my own words, so this is not clinical. I'm not a clinician. I'm just a regular person who's had these experiences and feel pretty passionately about helping draw awareness, help foster understanding. So, in my own words, a substance use disorder is a very complicated medical condition that basically makes people want to keep using a particular substance, whether that's alcohol or a drug or whatever it is, because of the way that it makes them feel. It makes them feel good, and that's probably an understatement as the word to describe it. But then they keep using it, and the use becomes out of control. And that's when it starts to have a very bad impact on their life, but they don't stop because they like how much it makes them feel. And then this out of control use then actually leads to a complete physical addiction to the substance, which then makes it pretty impossible to function like they did before. Things start spinning out of control. It starts harming the people who love them, the people around them. This is why it often gets talked about like it's a family disease, if you've heard that, because it doesn't just affect the person who's suffering from a substance use disorder. It really deeply affects, in some cases, affects the loved ones even more. Over time, using that substance so heavily actually changes how the brain works. So clinically, in the medical world, through all the education that doctors and medical folks receive, addiction is seen as a brain disorder. The other important thing to understand is that it has no prejudice. Like, it literally affects every kind of person there is. A person from any kind of background. It's any race, gender, sex, orientation, income level, education, socioeconomic background, everything. It doesn't matter. It affects literally every kind of person. From my experience and all the conversations that I've had with people who love someone with a substance use disorder or grew up in a home with a parent who suffered from this, it seems to take the very best people, like your favorite uncle, your sweet mom, your awesome father. When you hear people talk about it, that it always seems to be the most wonderful people who were like taken from them. Addiction took them from them. And, really nice, sweet, kind, funny people facing this. That is a very brief background on what is substance use disorder and addiction. The piece that really always shocks me even after all of these years, almost 20 years of paying attention to the stats with all the surveys and the research, is just how common it is. I'm just talking about the United States right now, by the way. I don't have the latest stats from, across the world. So that the global picture is a different story. I'm just talking about the United States where I am. So there's a survey that is often led by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. This is an agency of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So again, I've been kind of looking at this, for several years. That agency's job is to look at substance use disorders and mental health nationally throughout the whole country. So as of yesterday, when I was, looking this up on their website and working on my memoir, 2024 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, so this is the big study they always pay attention to, they found that 48.4 million Americans, or 12 or older, by the way, that is 16.8% of all Americans, had a substance use disorder in the past year. And then if you drill down even further and you look at alcohol use disorder specifically, or alcoholism, and I always pay attention to this, as you know, because that's what has affected my family the most. That's what my mother, has suffered with, and other members of my family. So that is the most predominant, that's the most common substance use disorder. And that survey found that there are 27.9 million people in the United States who were 12 years or older who had an alcohol use disorder in the past year. To put that into perspective, that is basically 1 in 10 Americans who are 12 or older. 1 in 10. That's a pretty significant number. That's 10% about. So again, that is just the United States. So keep that in mind. Imagine what those numbers would look like if you looked at it from a global perspective. And some years ago, I did look at some of the research in the UK and found that the numbers were pretty spot on in terms of percentages. It's very important to think about how common it is. But the number that I always pay the closest attention to is the estimates at how many kids are currently living with a parent who abuses alcohol in the United States. And when I started researching, I was starting my healing journey. And throughout my whole life, and you probably felt this way too, I felt like these problems were unique to my family. I felt very alone, and it was because nobody talked about it. It was absolutely a secret. I personally worked really hard to keep it a secret. I didn't want anyone to know that my mom had this drinking problem because I thought it was our problem. It was something to be very ashamed of. I had no idea that many of the kids in my class, the people I knew in my neighborhood, were going through something similar or worse than me because of a substance use disorder. So this is the stat that I pay attention to. Right now, take a guess. What would you guess is the percentage of kids right now? I'll give you a second. Right now, 1 in 4 kids in the United States has at least one parent who abuses alcohol. 1 in 4. That's a quarter of the kids in a kid's class, a quarter of the kids in their sports teams, a quarter of the kid in their neighborhoods, a quarter of the kids you see at the grocery store. They are experiencing the effects of that kind of environment. And if you're watching my videos on my channel, you probably have either some experience like this or you know someone who has. So that stat has not really changed in these nearly 20 years I've been paying attention to it. So that is why I feel so strongly that it's important for us to continue to raise awareness so that we can start to minimize the shame tied to it. We can minimize the number of kids who are growing up living with the secret and feeling like they're the only one and losing hope because they are so far from being alone. Another stat to share with you, there was a 2023 study in JAMA Pediatrics conducted by the University of Michigan researchers, and they estimated that 19 million children under 18 in the U.S. lives with a parent or other adult who has a substance use disorder. So again, another confirmation that it's about 1 in 4. So again, we're just talking about the United States. Imagine what that number is globally if you looked at it. And in my other videos and in my email newsletter and everything I share, we've talked at length about the effects that this kind of environment has on kids. So it won't get into that, but I just wanted to give you those numbers so that you can see just how incredibly common it is. I personally believe that this is a global health crisis, not just for the people who are afflicted with substance use disorders, but for everyone around them, the people who love them and the people who are dependent on them, such as the kids. Another little story for you. Back in 2010, I started rekindling my love of writing. It was part of the start of my healing journey. I started writing about a story that was based loosely on my experiences growing up with my mom and the struggles that she had. And it turned into a whole manuscript. It's now a book called Eastern Peters Operation Cool, and it's for tweens. So it's about ages 8 to 12, is basically loosely inspired by my own experiences, my normal coming of age struggles as a 12-year-old, and then coping with the effects of my mom's alcoholism and all that went into it. And I was really excited about this story because, again, fresh off the awareness, the wisdom about how common it is, I just felt that this story was very important to help kids around that age know that they're not alone and to have some hope about what the future might look like. And I marched forward, got into the publishing space and joined writers groups and writers associations. And I was absolutely stunned by the feedback that I received. The feedback was that this topic, having the focus on a kid growing up with an alcoholic parent, was far too sensitive and very niche. It wasn't mainstream enough. Niche. 1 in 4 kids, 1 in 4, 25% of all kids in the United States. But talking about it is way too faux pas. We don't want to talk about it. This was very heartbreaking for me because I could see there was such a kind of lack of awareness, misunderstanding, or fear in so many important spaces, the publishing industry, schools. Once my book was published, which ended up being published through a very small publisher that totally believed in the story and the purpose, I went and took PTO days from work and spoke to kids in schools. And some of the teachers actually asked me to not talk about the parental alcoholism piece, but just to focus on some other more relatable topics such as bullying and friendship and those other topics that were more common and easier to talk about. And I obliged, but it really did make me so sad because we have so many kids, millions of them, feeling like they're alone and not knowing what to do about what's happening in their homes. I really hope that over time, with more awareness, with discovery of just how common it is, that we'll start to change and start talking more openly about it, just like we do with other kinds of medical conditions and issues that are affecting families every single day. I feel very grateful for this community, for you following along, for the contributions that you make to growing awareness, to making people not feel so alone, because we're definitely not alone in this, unfortunately. It's extremely common. If you're new here and you haven't yet signed up for my free guide, it's called The Blueprint You Never Got, and it is what I wished I had when I started my healing journey. It's the first steps to learning how to take good care of yourself when you didn't get the blueprint. If you grew up in dysfunction, if you grew up with an alcoholic parent or whatever it was in your particular case. It's free and it's linked in the description of this video. And let me know in the comments, are you surprised by these statistics? And do you think that we are making change? Do you think there's more awareness in our society about just how common substance use disorders are? Or do you think we're where we've always been over the last 20 years or so? I'd love to know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.